inside of us, there is our conscious mind that we're all aware of. We're thinking about work, or we're thinking about the cat that walks across the room. And that's the part of our mind that we're aware of. And then there's our subconscious mind, where it records everything that happens to us in our lives. Whether we register it on a conscious level or don't register it, or it might be something we register on a conscious level at one point, but then we file it away for, not allowed to say safekeeping, but to be able to pull it out of the filing cabinet at some point in time, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. So that's where many of our knee-jerk reactions occur, where, again, something happens and we respond, and those responses are usually stored in the subconscious mind. And it's also the home of the ego. It's the home of our inner critic, which are components of the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is very much tied to our stress response system, our fight, flight, freeze, and then the newer one, fawn response. But there's also another aspect, which is our superconscious mind.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Rita, thank you for coming on Broaderlands podcast. It's an honor and privilege.
Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. I'm so excited. There's so much stuff I would love to talk about with you, but we only have a short period of time. And I just love your mind. I mean, I wish I could hang out with you, to be honest. I was telling you earlier, and it's just, maybe you can share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and kind of a little bit brief walkthrough of your life journey, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I'm a naturopathic physician, and I work primarily as a medical intuitive counselor, and energy medicine practitioner, helping people find wholeness and happiness in their lives, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, but just giving guidance to those that need some direction.
Yeah, thank you. We're here to talk about your new book. Dang, it was me all along. And it's right here in the background. And if you ever want to revise it and you need a brown guy, just I've been practicing.
You're available, huh?
Yeah. No, the only thing about your book is that I don't have room to speak Victimese.
You don't have
room to speak Victimese.
Oh. Well,
it's everyone else. It's not me.
And being a victim is really a mindset, and it's a coming from life from a powerless position. Which is kind of sad. I mean, I did victim really good for a very long time. But when you sit there and start, and I'm going to say this word, start having boundaries. And to me, boundaries are all about, what about me? How does this make me feel? What does it make, what do I want to do? How does this fit into my life? Because when we start including ourselves into the equation and making choices based on what we want, shocker as that may be, it moves you right out of the victim space because it's not happening to you. You have control. Even if the choice and the control is to make a hard decision that you maybe wouldn't have made before.
It seems like it's just, for a human being, we naturally fall victim or get stuck in victimhood when we experience a lot of trauma, and painful experiences that we get trapped in. When you growing up and maybe your life journey, did you experience any type of trauma that kept you trapped? I love talking about trauma, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I came from a very dysfunctional family. I left there. I moved out when I was 17 and discovered that I just kept getting into relationships, both personal and romantically, with narcissists, or self-serving, ego-driven people, and because I never put me into the equation. It was always about them. But it always ended up where they were doing this to me, and these situations were happening to me. And again, from this very powerlessness place.
Mm.
But people that experience trauma, many times, especially if they come from an abusive family, or a family where one of the parents is narcissistic, they learn early on to just give it up, and to give up their autonomy to make the other person happy, because it makes life better. They don't have to sit there and worry about the consequences. It's like, oh, you want me to do that? Okay. And you just do it so that you don't have to suffer the consequence of saying no and what the other person might do. So people that come from a traumatic background really have to relearn how to be. I mean, and not that it's hard, but it is your life, and you just assume that that's how it is, and this is who I am, and people are always after me, kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. What's the whole purpose of your book, if you don't mind me asking?
So the purpose of the book is to help people to tune into themselves in order to find happiness in their lives. There was a study by the National Science Research Foundation, something like that identified that 80% of our thinking is negative. So we think, well, I'm the only sad, person in the room, but the reality is that most people are in that place. Most people, come from a negative thought pattern. But once you start changing your thoughts and changing the way you relate to things, and you change the way you relate to things by tuning into what's going on inside, your life can become so much more happy and so much more stress-free. And you can reprogram your body from having being in a reactive place to having it be like, oh, that just happened. Oh, my car just broke down. Oh, my computer just blew up. Oh, that person just treated me like crap, and not going into this automatic response mode, of emotional dysregulation or getting angry or going into victim mode or whatever. It gives you more choices.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. I know there was a study in Stanford where I forget the name of the doctor, Luskin, I believe his name was, but he said we have about 60 thoughts per day flowing through our mind. And he said 10% of them are brand new. No, 60,000 thoughts that flow through our brain throughout the day. The rest are all repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wonder why it's kind of hard.
If you take that and go, and then 80% of those are negative. That's pretty powerful and overwhelming to think about what's going on inside. But one of the things that I found is that you can't change what's going on inside, and you can change it. That's the good news. That's the piece of hope, is that you can change it. But if you don't start becoming aware of that negative thinking, or, the things that you're reacting to, et cetera, you can't change it, because most people are living on autopilot. And something happens, they have a reaction, and they'll behave in some predetermined way based on their life experiences, based on their trauma, and they don't think they can change it. And so by paying attention to it, it gives you that opportunity, that little pregnant pause, to make a different choice or look at something from a different way, or even in hindsight to go, okay, this happened and I responded this way, which left me not feeling good or whatever. And you can say, okay, the next time a situation like this occurs, this is how I'm going to respond, or at least, like try to respond, you know, and you might be successful, you might not be successful, but you try. And it's only through the trying that it can ever change.
Yeah, thank you. That was mind blowing when I read that in your book. 80% of our thoughts are fear based.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I'm probably going to break down some of the maybe have you kind of touch on some of the chapters in your book because it's fascinating. And the first one would be our mysterious inner world. What's that all about?
Okay. So inside of us, there is our conscious mind that we're all aware of. We're thinking about work, or we're thinking about the cat that walks across the room. And that's the part of our mind that we're aware of. And then there's our subconscious mind where it records everything that happens to us in our lives, whether we register it on a conscious level or don't register it, or it might be something we register on a conscious level at one point, but then we file it away for, I don't want to say safekeeping, but to be able to pull it out of the filing cabinet at some point in time, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. So that's where many of our knee-jerk reactions occur, where, again, something happens and we respond, and those responses are usually stored in the subconscious mind. And it's also the home of the ego. It's the home of our inner critic, which are components of the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is very much tied to our stress response system, our fight, flight, freeze, and then the newer one, fawn response. But there's also another aspect, which is our superconscious mind. And I don't mean to sound like all religious-y here, but there's not any other way to describe it. But that's where we connect to something higher, where we connect to higher vibrating energy or the divine or spirit or our higher self, whatever word you want to put there. And everyone has had that experience. You go for a walk in the woods and you have this sense of calmness and this sense of peace, and when we have those experiences, when we feel like we're in the flow and in the groove of what's going on, we are naturally connected to that source of energy.
Thank you. You have another chapter called "Me and My Emotions." There's a saying. There's a saying in the book. There's a saying in the book. I mean, not in the book, but there's a saying in the 12-step community. And they use the acronym of fear. F everything and run. And that seems like to be a normal response for me when I was so unconscious and stuck in my trauma and my conditioned state of being. I couldn't face anything. So you talked about the 4 F's, fight, flight, freeze and fawn. Yeah. And, my 2 were fight and flight. It was either fight or flight.
Flight or freeze. I'm a really good freezer. And then let me just explain to the listeners, so fight is where you're going to put up your dukes and fight it out with someone. You get angry with someone, you use your energy to push them away. Flight is where you pick your stuff up and leave, but it might be in a more subtle way where someone's talking and you just cross your arms, and you kind of disconnect from the conversation or their interaction. Freeze is like a deer in a headlight. And so tied to freeze is something called dissociation. And I joke around because my mom liked to yell. And so I have this internal volume control, and so part of my little freeze response growing up was I would turn down the volume and I would go over there, and you start thinking about something else, and you're not present with what's going on. And so people go, well, what happened? It's like, you don't necessarily know because you're really not connected to the here and now. And then a newer stress response has been added, and it's called the fawn response. And the fawn response isn't so fight, flight, and freeze are biological, they happen. We have no choice. The fawn response is more of a learned response, so it's not necessarily innate in us. But when we are young children, especially if we're in an abusive, toxic household, and there's this expectation that we comply or there's consequences, we tend to learn how to fawn. And basically, we say, what I want or what I need is not important. And I'm putting that to the side because it's my responsibility to take care of this other person. And often that response becomes ingrained in us, when we're little children. And so we grow up thinking, well, this is who I am and this is how I'm supposed to be. And it sets the stage for developing codependent relationships or being a people pleaser, where you just say yes to everyone because you don't want to experience what their reaction might be if you say no.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I know Bruce Lipton uses this as an example all the time, and he talks about the Jesuit priest. And they have that saying, give me your child for the first several years, and I'll tell you the person they'll become. And that's all. Our early years is where our subconscious brain gets developed.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah. So, to me, there's kind of two different stages. So one is, I'm going to say, more pre-verbal, so that period before we really have the ability to communicate, so when you're an infant, to maybe 3 years old. And so things happen during that period where when you grow up, you just don't remember. You don't remember the trauma at all because you were too young. You might feel it in your body and you might have a visceral response to it. But as far as like having a memory tied to it, nothing, And then, but it's believed that we're kind of like open channels until we're 7 years old and we start to claim our autonomy as being a person. And so whatever people say or do or our life experiences, they become how we frame our position in the world. So if we're always left feeling stupid, or inadequate or whatever growing up, it's like that's how we're going to interact with the world from that positioning. It's not to say having life experiences can't create that in someone. You're constantly let go from a job. You're constantly ending relationships. Things that happen on a regular and chronic basis can create a core belief in you that there's something wrong with you. But for most people, the vast majority of people, this all happens prior to 7 years old.
Well, yeah, thank you. What would be your definition of the ego or your understanding?
So the ego is really bent on survival and it's bent on being important. It really lives on one-upsmanship or being the biggest, the brightest, the smartest, the happiest, the whatever on the planet. But the ego also drives us, so it's that part of us that says, go, 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 do, or there's something that you want. And, I don't know, lost the thought. Moving on. But to me, the biggest enemy of our happiness is our ego. Because our ego says, well, you can't be happy until you lose 10 pounds. Or you can't be happy until you're married and have children. Or you can't be happy until you have a successful job. And that's not ourselves. It's not our higher self saying any of this. It's our ego, because those things make us fit into society, but it's not necessarily who we are.
Yeah, you also talk about the inner critic, which I appreciated in your book. I appreciated, and is that the same thing, the inner critic? Because I still have that, and sometimes it still gets me at times, even though I'm
Mhm.
aware of it. I always say when the unconscious becomes conscious, enlightenment occurs, and that's been my experience. But I still have a lot of stuff, that inner critic at times. You're not good enough. You're not worthy. You can't do it. It's pretty strong in me, and I just realized that probably about a year ago how strong it still is in me.
Mhm. Yeah, and your description of your own experience is a perfect example of what the inner critic does. It's the voice in our head that says, you're fat, your thighs are too big, you suck at this, you can't do that, people are looking at you. Um, and it really drives and controls a whole lot of what's going on because uh, it's a big part of that negative thinking that we have. But it's interesting because if you start paying attention to it, you can challenge it and
Mm.
go, well, no, not really, or that hasn't been my experience. And breaking that down.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. Because it's hard to sometimes figure out, is that intuition, or is that the inner critic, or is that the ego? Because something's telling me to get butt implants, but I'm not sure if I should use my. No, I'm just messing around. I'm just messing around. There.
But that's I'm going to take that as a question because I have a
Okay.
response to that. All right, not about the butt implants. I mean, unless you want to like do a reading on that. So this has been my experience. When it's our higher self or God or it's divinely inspired piece of intuitive insight coming to us, it always comes through as a very soft voice. It comes through as kind of a suggestion. You're like, hey, maybe you should do this. Um, and usually it's phrased so as a couple of words. It might be an image, depending on how you personally receive and process information. If it's the ego, it will sit there and barrage you. Well, you should be doing this and, blah, 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 and try to talk you into doing something that you may or may not want to do. And so for many people, they tend to listen to the ego and
Mm.
not to that intuitive voice inside.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. And there's a beautiful line, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but you said, the higher the frequency, the closer to God. And the
Hmm.
lower the frequency, the more kind of disconnected you are from the life giving source.
Very good. Very good.
Something like that.
That was pretty good. And what I'm talking about, so we all have a soul. I think most people will agree, we have a soul, and when we stop breathing, the soul leaves the body and, you know, becomes a ghost. It does something. And, and this is based on Kabbalistic tradition, so there's the soul. And so when we're more connected to the divine, when we're in higher levels of vibration, well, one, we're happy. So that's always good. We experience joy, we experience contentment, we experience enthusiasm or passion, and those are all higher vibrating emotions. But what they suggest is that through our life experiences, I don't pronounce it, pronounce this word right. I call it Kelly pots, but it might be chalupas. I don't know. This Hebrew. And but they're shells that form around us, kind of like those Russian nesting dolls. And the more we go with the draw of the ego, because the ego sits there and says, you should go make more money, or you should go do this, or you should be mean to that person. That's the ego driving. And the more you pay attention to that lure, you develop more of these shells and more of these shells that obstruct your connection to that higher source or higher vibration. And one thing that they suggested, which I found very interesting, is after you develop a number of these shells, it makes it so you can't really receive that energy very well anymore. And so now you have to turn to other places to get that input. And that's where you start finding your narcissistic people, your energy vampires, because they can't get the life-giving sustenance that subtle energy offers. And so they have to get it from somewhere else. And I was like, ooh, that's kind of scary, but very true. But it's very true, because they don't have the energy of their own. And where that energy comes from is from source.
Yeah, thank you. You brought up energy vampires. What's an energy vampire to you?
So an energy vampire is someone who, basically tries to suck energy off of you, and it's not like they have a straw and they're like sucking on you, but they're, all right. I'm just going to tell this. So my boyfriend and I have come up with this term for, okay, so there are those people that, you say hi to them and make some comment, and then they just talk and talk and talk and talk, and your eyes are rolling in your head and you're like trying to get away, but they suck you back in. The classic energy vampire. And so his neighbor does that. His neighbor's name is Larry. And so whenever like one of us, end up in a conversation with someone who's energy vampiring us, it's like, oh, I got Larry. But people that are energy vampires aren't really interested in giving up their energy. They're not, they just want to take. And so even the people that talk all the time think that they're being nice, but they're unaware of the discomfort that they're creating in the person that they're talking to incessantly, as that person is like looking around, doing all this stuff, and usually if you're in an interaction with someone that's an energy vampire, usually when the interaction ends, you always feel depleted, or you might feel tired, or you might feel like you were in a great mood and now maybe not so much, because this person has pulled energy from you.
Yeah, appreciate that. I pulled something up from your book, and I'm gonna read it because I love it. If you don't mind, it's all about the chemistry. Not to make excuses for behaviors, but we each have our own unique set of thoughts, emotions, and emotional responses. Our programming and past experiences set the stage for how our bodies and minds will react. When we experience a particular emotion, our body releases flurry of powerful chemicals known as neuropeptides into the body.
So that was probably, I have to tell you, the research on that section of the book, I found to be the most powerful. And especially the most powerful with the idea that change is possible. Like this whole conversation is really about changing who we are. And people think that it's so hard and you can't do it. And it's, going to be this giant effort, which it's not really. Some of it's a little bit challenging and you have to be brave and put your big girl panties on to do it. Okay. But coming back to that comment. So when we have an emotion, our body releases neuropeptides. And so this is the part that I found the most fascinating. And so here's a little biochemistry, everyone. And I'm going to keep it very simple because I only know my little teeny bit. So on the cells, there are something that are called receptor sites. And so the receptor sites are like keys or like locks, so the lock on your front door. And the neurotransmitters, the hormones, are like the key. And so if the right key goes into the right lock, it'll either open the door or close the door causing the cell to respond in a certain way. Okay, that's it for the biochemistry. But what's interesting, so if you live well, let me put another piece in first. And so if you experience a certain kind of emotion a lot, then the receptor sites that handle those emotions, when the cell replicates, it actually produces more of these receptor sites on the cell. So if you live in a lot of anxiety or worry or are fear-based and live in cortisol and your adrenal glands are constantly activated, it's like the cells in our body actually create more of these receptor sites so that we can more quickly react, more easily respond to the stressor. You know, and the example I give in the book is it's like opening up another line at the grocery store. You know, people can get through faster. And so if you're this stress-based person and your knee-jerk response is to go into fight mode, then something happens, and it might not even be very big and it might not be very important, but we have all of these receptor sites to deal with that stress fight mode on the cells. It's not going to take very much in order to trigger us into having a response. So I was like, okay, that kind of sucks. But, and this was the great part. This was the great part. As you sit there and start shifting your attitude and start having more gratitude in your life and start connecting to higher vibrations and looking and actively working on having more happiness in your life and calming down that stress, the receptor sites for the stress hormones start to diminish, and the receptor site for dopamine and other feel-good hormones start to increase. You know, and the cells in our bodies are replaced every 120 days. So that we're only talking 3 months. Now, granted, you can't go from like 0 to totally perfect in 3 months, but 3 months is pretty quick. And so I'm going to share my personal experience because my book, dang, it was me all along. What isn't a memoir, you know, but really, well, you know, I sit there and I make the comment, you know, it really was my journey, you know, and I share my insights and things that I learned as far as my goal, my journey to find happiness. And one of the things that I discovered, I don't know, was after really starting to practice the concepts that I share in this book, within 6 months, I was able to feel and detect a profound change in myself. I mean, I'm a professional ruminator, you know, so if something happens, I can sit there and think about it for days and days and days and weeks and a really long time. I'm really good at it. And one of the things that I noticed is that if something happened and I started thinking about it and ruminating on it, I would catch myself and either do something to resolve the rumination, but it would only last, like this is at that 6-month point. It would maybe last like 2 or 3 days, not weeks at a time, you know, and I'm like, wow. And the depths that I would go, you know, in my own emotional place weren't nearly as bad. You know, it's kind of like, okay, this is bothering me, but it didn't obsess me, you know, and kind of take over everything that was going on.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I love about your book too is you talked about how we become addicted to our emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really interesting, but it explains a lot. You know, because and it really kind of fits in with what we were just talking about. You know, when we have a lot of stress, and I just keep using stress because people kind of get it, and it's a very generic word to me. But when we have a lot of stress in our lives, whatever our stress is, our own personal stress, it's like our body is constantly releasing these hormones. And there are some people that, all right, this is according to Eckhart Tolle, so if you have had a lot of trauma in your life, if you've had a lot of bad experiences, your body kind of craves those hormones. It's like it needs to get fed, which is kind of scary. And so you can become addicted to it, just like any kind of drug. And so, a situation might happen and you'll, in a very sick and weird way, feel better in the bad place, even though you're in a bad place, but it's comfortable, like an old pair of shoes. It's weird. And actually I want to throw this in because I think your listeners will find this interesting. Tied to emotional addiction is the whole concept of abuse. And, one of the things that when there's someone that's in an abusive relationship, and I'm talking an adult relationship, you're with someone that beats you or is mean to you all the time or whatever, and they leave and then they go back, and they leave and they go back. And people go, why do they do that? Why do they do that? But it's all because of our chemistry. When you're in a relationship like that, you get groomed. That's the kind of technical word to it, and you get used to having all of this stress hormone in your body. So when you meet this person, they make you feel so good and they're great, and you have all of this dopamine and feel good hormones in your body, and it's just, oh, it's good. But then something happens and it causes the body to release stress hormones like cortisol. But then usually in a toxic relationship, the abuser will come back and go, oh, I didn't mean it. I won't do it again. Come back home. It'll be different. I promise. And so you go back, and maybe it starts off very simple, just little things happening, not that you're ready to walk out the door. And, but you re-engage with that person. And so now you have all this dopamine and it feels good and you're back together and you can be all in love again. And then they pull their crap again. And now you have all these stress hormones. And so what ends up happening is that your hormones become so dysregulated and there becomes this addiction to the feeling good that many people will go back because they can't deal with the whole, because they start off like this and then it gets worse and it starts going like this, and so you have a fight and you're down here way low and then they say they're sorry and now you're up here, and so when relationships end, that's called a trauma bond. And all you really want is like a text from them, an email from them, just something to give you that little dopamine high because you're down in the depths of your own hormonal hell. And one woman had suggested, and I have another book called The Dysfunctional Dance of the Empath and Narcissist, which talks about this as well, and in a different angle. But she suggested that it was easier to break a heroin addict or a heroin addiction than it is to break a trauma bond. That's how powerful they can be.
Wow.
So people wonder why they keep going back. It's because, it's not that they're addicted to the person, but kinda.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and when we're stuck in stress, I think we are in a threatened homeostasis state, or we're in disharmony with self, right? So that opens the door to some form of addiction, whether it's with behavior patterns or substance abuse, etc. But I'm kind of really interested in. I wanted to ask you this when I asked you to come on. With addiction. No, when people are really full blown addicts, is there entity attachment, and what is that?
Okay, and that's a great question, and I'm going to say yes. And so I'm going to backpedal this conversation a little bit and start at the beginning. So an entity attachment is a ghost or spirit that attaches, and not physically attaches, but they come to the person. So I don't know where your listeners are, so I'm going to get a little technical, and if I'm not making sense to you, then just stop me and ask the question. So there's our auric field, there's the space around our body. And so when there's an energy or something that enters into our auric field, we assume it's ours. And so, there's many situations where people kind of dump their problems on you, and now you pick them up and you're trying to solve their problem. It's because they put that energy in your space and you're thinking it's yours to fix or yours to solve.
Yeah.
And so when an entity attaches, it comes into the auric field. And so the most common place that an entity attaches is in childhood, in a child who has experienced a lot of trauma. Their stress response mechanism is freeze, because they dissociate from the body and the entity comes in and kind of takes control. Talk about inner critic gone wild. When there's an entity attachment, inner critic gone wild. Oh my God, it's bad. And it will stay there until you raise your vibration to a higher state. Because its goal is to keep you down, negative as possible. And once you can raise your vibration up again, you kind of push it out of your field. And it's over there and not bothering you. With people that have addiction issues, whether it's drugs, alcohol, computers. I've had clients that had computer addictions, porn, sex. It doesn't matter.
Gerbils?
Huh?
Gerbils? I was messing up. Sorry.
I haven't heard that one before. But when you're engaged in the addiction, one, you're in a dissociative state, but your energy is also low, and it kind of opens the door for that entity to come in and kind of take control. So you often hear stories, like, oh, Fred's a really nice guy, but God, he gets a few drinks into him and he's unrecognizable. And that's usually where the entity has come in and taken control over, the person and their reaction. And if you ask the person who you think has the entity attachment after the fact of them portraying their bad behavior, many times they don't really know what they did. Like they might have a recollection. Yeah, I went to the bar, and I talked to this person, but like detailed stuff, not really, because they're dissociated.
Wow. I mean, I'm just shocked when I've been hearing this more and more lately since I started this podcast and meeting great minds like you. And, when I would drink, I haven't took a drink for over 14 years now, but when I would drink, it was like something took me over. I was hijacked. Like, I don't remember why I became this person. I became really angry, very violent. And I went from being the cool guy to the guy, if I walked into a bar, or do you have a gun? Because he might start acting up, because I hung around with a lot of, not the nicest crowd at times, but, I grew up in, the ghetto by the sea, but, I felt like that wasn't me.
Answers your question, but
yeah,
exactly. It wasn't you. It was the entity. And I'll bet in those situations, there's not a real good recollection of what happened, so you know that you were angry and you got into a fight, but you really don't remember why or how it's just this vague thing. And it's because you were dissociating, you were over there and the entity stepped in.
Well, I don't know if I missed this, but so what are these entities and what's their whole purpose for sucking onto? I'm thinking of an algae fish when we're talking about this, and it's just sticking
Kinda.
to our aura, like you said. And but what's their whole why? Why do they thrive? Like, are we more tastier or more delicious because we're in a lower vibration, or what's the whole purpose?
So, the belief is, and I've seen, so the vast majority of these entities take on corporeal form. I have seen like other weird alien entities and other weird stuff. But we'll just go with like the basic one.
Yeah,
And the belief is that these individuals, when they died, they did not transition. They decided to be earthbound spirits because they were yucky, mean, nasty, crappy people in life. And so they they're the classic energy vampires, so we were sitting there talking about energy vampires kind of stealing your energy. My observation of them is that they find an emotion that you exhibit. So if anger was your go-to emotion when you were drunk, then that's what they fed off of. But usually it's one emotion or one feeling. And the way that I've described it before is it's kind of like the bat phone. Do you remember the bat phone, the big old red
yeah,
phone with one button? So now you're drinking and somebody says something that pisses you off, but it's still you. But it's still you. But in that situation, it's like you push the button, you call the entity, now the entity comes in to save the day, and you're kind of knocked out of it. But it's always there's a pattern and there's a consistency. And I've done a lot of spirit release work with people, and they think, well, just get rid of it. And if they're in an active entity situation, I can move the entity out of their auric field and raise their vibration so that it's not bothering them. Because when our vibration is high, our auric field is very firm. When it's low, it's a lot more porous, so stuff can come in. But, you get these complaints. It's like, well, I worked with these healers and they got rid of it for a while and then it came back. And I'm
yeah,
like, well, that's because you didn't experience that emotion until the other day and it came back. And so there can be these spans of time where, not with the alcohol or drug thing, where you're not having any entity issues, but because you haven't had that emotional reaction anymore. With people that drink, most times they don't have an entity issue in the general sense of the word. It is more tied to that behavior that they have, and then there's the triggering emotion that sets things off.
well,
And
thank
then when
you.
they stop drinking or doing the behavior, it all stops and goes away.
Because we've raised our vibration and we're no longer tasty, or they no longer have power to
They
tap
no
in.
longer have power.
Mm,
Correct.
yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I don't want to get too much into it because maybe that's another episode in the future, hopefully, and but I have a lot of questions on that. But you brought up another chapter in your book. It's called Self-Awareness Game, the power of
Mhm.
self-awareness. And I always say awareness is everything. A lot of times in the 12-step community, the 12 steps, and God's got to do it for you. But I always say you can pray to God 1,000 times, but without awareness, there is no change. I felt a lot of the stuff that created change from my life and myself and to raise my vibration is awareness. Awareness is probably one of the most powerful tools, at least for me, that I use on a daily basis.
Mhm.
Um, what
And
is
it's the game changer. It's the
mm,
game changer. We live on autopilot and we don't really understand why we do the things that we do. And so until you start becoming aware of your thoughts or your emotional reactions or your behaviors, then you're powerless to change them. Um, and becoming more aware, I like to break it down, because you can sit there and pick the thing that bothers you the most. and I tell this story in the book. So I used to be really shy, like really shy. And I didn't like that behavior. And I decided that I was going to change that behavior. And I wasn't really sure how I was going to do it, but that was my determination. And so, and this is going to sound so lame to so many of the listeners. And so I couldn't even go into like a 7-Eleven and say good morning to the person behind the counter because I was that shy. So my goal, because I used to walk to work, I was pretty young, and I would stop and get a soda because I drink soda in the morning. and it was like, so my goal was to say hi to the person behind the counter before they said hi to me. And I mean, I remember it to this day. I stood outside the store and like took a few deep breaths and really like sucked it up. And it's like, okay, you're going to do this, which with the change process, that is the hardest part, doing the thing that you need to do is the hardest part and can be the most white knuckling part. And so it's like, okay. And I walk in and I looked at the person and I said hi, and I immediately darted between the aisles and I had like a panic attack. It wasn't quite a panic attack, but I was just like, okay, you did it. And I did that every day for an entire summer. And by the end of the summer, I actually could walk in there and say hi to the person. And that just began this whole process. Yeah, and even to this day, I mean, we're talking, I'm not going to disclose how many years, but a lot of years. And there are still situations that come up where my lips are sealed and I really have to look at a situation and go, you need to say something about this. You need to make that communication, even though it's hard, and then just do it. But every time you do it, it gets easier and less challenging and less white knuckling. And sometimes you just need to make the decision to do it. I remember, and this was, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. Because again, for me, that was a big thing, communicating to people and communicating my inner stuff. And so I had gone to this party. All right, here's some dirt. So I had gone to this party. And this guy was kind of like all in my business, but he was cute. And I was like, okay. But I had made the commitment to myself that I just wasn't going to have like casual sex, and I didn't want a friend with benefit, and I could see that I could become very attached to this man because I could just tell. And, but he was like calling me and wanting to come out of a burn pile, burn my stuff and blah, blah, blah. And so quickly I asked him, I go, so are you interested in me? Are you interested in having a relationship with me? I mean, I just came out and asked him. And then I hung up the phone and had a panic attack. Not quite a panic attack, but pretty close, because I had never, ever in my life just put that out there. But it was protecting me, because I could see me getting all involved with this guy and maybe having sex with him, and now I'm really attached to him, and him being, oh no, I don't really want to have that kind of a relationship, which would be bad. At least at that point in time, it would have been bad and very hurtful.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. I had the heart. It took a long time to like speak my mind or just be honest. I tend to not be able to express myself or communicate very well, and that took a long time. Even just like noticing like some of my actions whenever my family would get together, I find myself making fun of my mother, and justifying it with everyone laughing, like I'm not harming her. But I realized, man, I had some kind of resentment or something. What's going on with this? Why am I always making fun of her? And when I really seen that, like for what it was, it went away. Like it made it easier for me no longer to do that kind of stuff. Like it was all unconscious behaviors.
Mhm.
or patterns that I got trapped in for a long time.
Well, I mean, one of the ones, like that was a long term. I've been working on that talking, communicating thing for years, probably like you've been working on it for
Hmm.
years. One of the more recent ones, kind of going with your example, and your example is great, is complaining. So I'm half Jewish, I'm from New York, and so kvetching, complaining, is what you do. I mean, it's just what you do. And I had read this one thing that if you're a complainer, you are invested in negative energy because complaining in and of itself is, you're just saying negative things. And I stopped and started paying attention to my normal communication and was like, wow, you really complain. Okay, I have some friends that complain even more than me, but I was pretty good. And I joke around and dang, it was me all along where I say, and some of my best stories are of me complaining about stuff because they usually come out pretty funny. But it's true. And I just started paying attention and it was really a whole lot easier to change once I like made that connection. Kind of like you and your mom, like, oh, I didn't even know I was doing that. So don't do that. And every so often I'll catch myself where it's like, and it's like, oh, you're complaining, stop. Or, and sometimes you need to complain, like you just need to vent. But now I ask permission. It's like, can I whine for a minute? Or can I just complain for a minute? Versus just, I had a girlfriend and the big mistake was answering the phone at 8 o'clock in the morning. And the second biggest mistake was asking, how are you? Huge mistake. Because she was like, oh, my period started this morning and for 20 minutes. And it's just like, okay. But I was a very good host for energy vampires. And so she totally larried me with her whining. And I just stood there and took it. Because that's the other piece. I'm going to kind of circle back to the energy vampire. There are people that are just great hosts and will stand there and allow their energy to be drained from them. And so there's the awareness, like if you find yourself around people that are energy vampires, cutting it short, up until the point of not interacting with those people.
Well, yeah, thank you. So you would call that conscious complaining when you give yourself permission to complain?
Well, sometimes it's like stuff happens and you just need to have somebody hear it.
Yeah.
And then you get it out of your system, but I try to, because then I know I'm doing this and then I'm going to stop versus having it being just who I am and what I do.
Yeah, I love that. You brought up Eckhart Tolle earlier, and his book New Earth changed, turned on a light switch when I read it. Some people talk about, oh, you can't just read. Man, sometimes when reading, when your heart's open, something will shift in you. And that book New Earth created a shift in me. And but he talked about complaining strengthens the ego, and I'm like, holy shit! I've always complained. I complained a lot. It was all unconscious too. It was more of a habit, and that's all I did, and it just made me sick. But when I'm more aware of that, and you know what, I need to complain in a healthy way and just let it all out. There's a major difference, and I love how you brought that up. Yeah.
Well, and to me, asking permission is now I'm not just dumping on you, and now you can be emotionally prepared to receive my dump. Because if somebody's going to do something, then you can sit there and brace for impact or whatever, versus just getting whacked with it. And so I think asking, in advance gives them the opportunity to say no or be prepared.
Yeah, thank you. You talked about in your book mindfulness. What's your definition of mindfulness? Because you have all kinds of different types of mindfulness practice, like mindfulness tapping and all that. Maybe you can help us expand a little bit on that, if you don't mind.
So mindfulness is just becoming aware of what's going on inside,
Mm,
and the practices that are offered in the book are ways to help shift what's going on inside of you into from a lower vibration to a higher vibration. So mindfulness says, oh, I just complained. I mean, I was just mindful that I was complaining. Okay. Or I just had this interaction and it didn't feel good. And so I'm mindful about that. Or for some reason, it's like my energy is now it's dropping, and I'm starting to get cranky or whatever. And it's just really about paying attention to what's going on inside. Because if you start operating based on what's going on inside, it really is a game changer. I have a client and, well, she'll talk to me about stuff. And I go, so when you had that situation, was your energy going or was your energy going down? And we've been working on
mm.
not romantic relationship, but friend relationships. And, so she has some friends that whenever she's with them, it's a downward slide. But then when she's with other friends, she feels really good and she feels really energized. And it's like, but those are the people you want to be around. Because
Mm.
if you're around these other people and it's always dropping your energy and making you feel good and making you feel less than, then maybe you don't want to be around those people because they're affecting your happiness.
You have in the book our indelible spirit. What is the spirit? Because I love how you broke down, like in Christianity they mention it this way, in Greek philosophy they mention it this way, Africa, Hawaii, Eastern traditions. What is the spirit?
So there's the soul, but then there's the spirit is kind of like the active force inside of us. And so, so like in Christianity, they talk about being one with spirit and communicating with spirit, so it's just really about being in an active flow and an active groove with what's going on inside of you and what's not. So when your energy is doing this, you're in the
Mm.
flow and you're in the groove and your spirit is high. And when you're doing this, you're going back down to ego, back down into negative thinking and not being happy.
Yeah, thank you. So do you believe we can be blocked from spirit?
Only by our own volition,
Mm. Yeah,
because we're
thank
too
you.
trapped in ego.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. I really do. And um love to have you back. And I do want to end it with the last two lines of your book, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Can I just put this out? So if people want to get a hold of me to schedule a medical intuition evaluation, intuitive counseling session, or energy medicine session, they can go to my website, soulhealer.com. That's soulhealer.com. And my book, Dang, It Was Me All Along, is available on Amazon. You can get an autographed copy from my site. And you can find all of my books on my website or at any major book publishers.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll definitely upload all your information when we upload the this episode as well. So thank you.
Perfect.
Um,
Thank you.
at the very end of your book, you end it with this: stick with the people who leave your vibration high, with you feeling good inside and your alignment intact. They are the keepers. Let the rest go. You'll be happy you did. Thank you for shedding light on that.
It's
Yeah,
true.
thank you.
And thanks for having me. Great conversation.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. All right. Bye.